buying a used car. It's stressful, but it could be less stressful if you know what to watch out for. As a quick background, I wanted to make this video so that hopefully you don't get screwed over on your next car purchase. The first mistake, title issues. The worst of the title issues is buying a car that's stolen. How can we avoid this? Well, we can start by checking the VINs. Make sure that they all match. The dashboard VIN should match the door sill VIN, which should match the engine bay VIN, which should match the VIN on the title. If any of those VINs don't match, that's a huge red flag. There's really no reason why they shouldn't all be the same. It's not enough that they all match. Make sure that they're all legitimate. Make sure that the one on the dash isn't some random piece of metal they've crudely carved numbers into. Make sure that the rivets aren't loose from being swapped with another car. Make sure that the one on the door sill is the legitimate factory sticker. That doesn't peel off. If you can peel it off with your finger, that's not the real sticker. The engine bay VIN, make sure that they didn't Bondo over the original one and etch in new numbers with a toothpick. And then for the VIN on the title, make sure the title's real. Look at it closely, look for any smudges, look for any signs that it was printed off with someone's home ink. Oh my god, you can't even talk. Additionally, there are databases online of stolen vehicles where you can search the VIN number just for extra reassurance. If we're pretty confident the car isn't stolen, there's still other title issues that could pop up, like one, not having a title. If a car doesn't have a title, again, that could be another sign that it's stolen. So definitely make sure you look it up in at least one of those national stolen car databases. But also keep in mind that some states don't allow you to register a car without a title. And in that case, you'd have to register it in one state, pay the sales tax and the registration in that state, and then once you get the title and the plates, then re-register it in your state, again paying sales tax and registration. So if the car is not that rare, you know, just keep an open mind of maybe the extra cost isn't worth it. Another title issue that pops up is expired registration, which is when an owner should have put the car on non-op or non-operational registration, which is basically where they just pay a small flat fee to ensure that they don't have to pay any more registration fees. But if they haven't done that, then the registration fees have been building up at the DMV for the entire time that the registration's been expired. So if it's 2021 and the license plate tags say 2015, you want to either come to some agreement with the seller. Maybe they come with you to the DMV and you agree to split the fees down the middle. Maybe you make a best guess estimate on what the fees have grown to and factor that into the negotiation. But regardless, it's something that you need to look for. Another title issue is having a lien on a vehicle. On the California title, in the bottom left, there's a little box for a lien holder. If nothing's in there, you don't need to worry. But if there is something there, it means that some entity, usually the dealership or the bank that the owner financed the car from, has rights to the vehicle. For example, if the owner can't pay off the loan anymore, they can repossess it. So you don't want to be caught in the middle of that. If you pay the owner for the car when you buy it, they don't pay the bank back, and then the bank can repossess the car from you. Obviously, no one wants that. The best way to avoid this is to do the deal at the lender's office. That way you can simultaneously pay off the outstanding loan, pay the seller the remaining balance, you can get the title transferred to you, all in the same day, all in the same sitting, and avoid a lot of headache and confusion. The last title issue is a branded title, which is, again, on the California title, there will be a box in the top right. If it's blank, that means it has a clean title, nothing to worry about. If it says something like salvage or totaled or water damage, know what you're getting into. Research what a salvage title is or water damage. In most cases, you want to walk away from things like that. If you're truly a brave soul and you know what you're doing, then by all means go for it. But generally, vehicles like that have had substantial damage and are usually going to be a headache for the next owner. Now, there's a catch here. There's a way that even if the title doesn't say salvage on it, you could still end up buying a salvage title car. How? Let's say that I have a car that has a clean title. I totaled this car, and then I go in through insurance, I get it fixed. Now, technically, I'm supposed to apply for a salvage certificate through the DMV, but if I turn around and sell the car to you before I'm required to do that, I'll be signing over my original title that still says clean on it. So then when the ownership transfers to you, the new title you will get in the mail will say salvage. So sometimes it's not just enough to check the title itself, but also it's always worth it to pay $20 and get a Carfax report. If that scenario happens to you, the Carfax will show you the damage because they'll see that it's been through the insurance company for the repairs. So Carfax, buy, title issues, bad, check things. Mistake number 2. Mechanical issues, the ones that will make you regret buying the car in the first place. And probably the biggest of those would be a blown head gasket. Why? Well, for those of you who have never had to deal with a head gasket problem, you might go online, look up the head gasket for your car, and find that the part costs less than $100. And so it may not seem like it's that big of a deal, but it really is. One, because of where it is. You have to disassemble almost the entire engine to get to the head gasket. This is a very lengthy process, very expensive if you take it to a mechanic. And 2, because the head gasket itself is usually not the problem. The reason we have a head gasket leak, the most common reason, is when the engine overheats to the point where the head and the block, which are the components that sit between the head gasket, they actually warp. The extreme temperatures causes the metal to distort, and even if there's a gap that forms that's fractions of a millimeter, it can let coolant into the combustion chamber and cause the head gasket leak. Replacing the gasket's not going to solve that problem. The point is, we really want to avoid buying a car with a head gasket leak. How can we spot a head gasket leak? First, we can look in the engine bay. Check the coolant. Is the coolant low? If after the test drive the car is all warmed up, the thermostat's open, and there's no coolant leaks coming out of the coolant system, but the coolant level is low, head gasket. Is the coolant murky? Is it black? Is it sort of a mustardy sludge? Head gasket. Is the oil murky? Is the oil frothy? Head gasket. Another sign is in the back of the car is white smoke coming out of the exhaust. If it is, you probably have a head gasket leak. One exception is if you start the car, it's a cold day, and some sort of steam is coming out of the exhaust. It's more like your breath on a cold day. That's not a head gasket leak. But let's say it's a hot day and the smoke is white. That is a head gasket leak. Also be aware if there is blue smoke coming out of the exhaust, that would indicate an oil leak that's usually the valve seals or piston rings. Again, not a cheap thing to fix, so that's bad. On the test drive, if you smell any kind of sweet smell, that could be burning coolant. So important to drive with your windows open so that you can smell things, also hear things, any kind of weird noises from the engine or the suspension. Another sweet smell could be burning transmission fluid, which is also a bad thing because transmissions are not cheap to replace either. That's, just to clarify, that's automatic transmissions. Manual transmissions use different fluid, they just use gear oil. The last kind of easy sign to identify is after the test drive, if you park the car, turn the AC on full blast and leave it idling for 5, 10, 15 minutes, if the temperature starts to creep up, that could be another sign that you have a head gasket leak. Now, If a seller is especially sneaky, they could replace all the fluids right before you get there so that there's absolutely no signs in the engine bay that there's a head gasket leak. Of course, if you notice that all the fluids are brand new, like there's no sort of dirtiness in the oil at all, that could be a red flag that they're trying to hide something. And they could also pour some head gasket sealer in a can that you can buy for $5.99 at AutoZone, temporarily seal up the leaks, only for that to come loose when you buy the car months down the road. For the head gasket sealer, if you open the radiator cap, there's any kind of silvery residue or copper or any kind of fibrous stuff, that could be one of those head gasket sealers that just left some residue in there. Now, if they've made sure to clean the residue off, they've done their best job to hide it, you know, sometimes the only way that we can find that stuff out is with more intensive tests, which, again, if the seller's trying to hide something like that, they're probably not going to let you do in their driveway. Even a seller who's not trying to hide someone is probably not going to let you pull out the spark plugs and put a borescope into the cylinder in their driveway. If they do, that's great, but otherwise you're kind of at the mercy of what they'll let you do. Although there is one test that's relatively unintrusive that you might get away with doing in their driveway. Rent this tool from O'Reilly's for free. This fluid is like $10. You simply put the tube in your radiator, pour the fluid in, and squeeze this thing. If the fluid stays blue, you're good. If it turns green, you have a head gasket leak. It's a simple, easy, precise method of testing that could help prevent you from making a huge mistake. That's basically all I got for the head gasket. Another mechanical problem is lights on the dash. Any kind of warning lights on the dash indicates some problem with the car, and something like a check engine light could be very serious. I once bought a car where the used car dealership had taped over the back of the instrument panel with electrical tape so that sitting in the driver's seat you could not tell, but once you took apart the instrument panel, there was tape all over the back and the car had like $2,000 worth of things that needed fixing. So the easiest way to detect a scam like that is by putting the key in the ignition, and when you turn it to a certain position, you'll notice that all the lights on the dash come on. If some of the lights don't come on, then either the bulbs are out or the seller's trying to trick you. But a better way to look for this kind of thing is with one of these. This is an OBD scanner. It plugs directly into the car's computer. It'll tell you much more than the dashboard lights will. It'll actually give you the problem codes, which you can look up and to determine if the problems are actually serious or not. Side note, this OBD2 reader will only work on cars made in or after 1996, which is when the OBD2 connection was standardized. Before that, there's OBD1, which is a little messy because each car manufacturer had their own version of it, but a lot of times you can get adapters for OBD1 to OBD2, and then you can use this. I would check with your specific car, and then if it's older than that, you're kind of on your own with regards to the diagnostic side of things. You know, the only way to test older cars is really to test them the old-fashioned way. Something that sneaky sellers will do a lot of times is they'll go out and buy one of these, and they will erase all the problem codes on the computer right before you get there to test drive it, so that when you plug yours in, everything looks fine, it's all good, but it's not. And the way that you detect if the codes have just been cleared are by looking at the monitors with your scanner. So monitors are the checks that the car runs when you drive it, and it takes a while for certain monitors to show up as ready. If you see that some or all of the monitors are not ready, it would indicate that the codes have recently been cleared. Red flag. So those are like the worst mechanical issues that you can face when looking at used cars. But what if we could pick out a used car that's also going to mitigate the number of future mechanical problems we have? Well, we have to look for cars that have had TLC, tender loving care. And this might sound cheesy. So many people put a big emphasis on mileage when they buy a car, but the truth is a car with 120,000 miles that's been loved and cared for is going to greatly outlast a car with 70,000 miles that has been badly neglected. I mean, think about it. If a car has missed oil changes, hasn't been taken in promptly when it has serious problems. I mean, think about the head gasket. If a car is consistently overheating and the person just keeps driving it, maybe they're not watching their temperature gauges, they're not watching their oil pressure gauges, and they're driving with low oil pressure. Things like this add up over time, and really in the long run, a car that maybe has a few more miles but has been cared for is going to be much better on your wallet. This is the easiest thing to look for because it's all really obvious things that we all spot, like what is the paint like? Is the clear coat peeling because they didn't wash the car for 5 years and just left it out to rot in the sun? Are all the body panels covered with dents, or did they make an effort to always park it far away in the parking lot from anyone else? Probably the most telling sign is the tires. Are they Michelin's, or are they the cheapest Chinese knockoff that Pep Boys had at the time? Another telling sign is OEM parts on the car. OEM parts from the manufacturers, by the way, are just going to be the best quality parts. They're also a lot of times the most expensive, and so if the owner is putting those on their car, it just shows that they care, that they're willing to spend money, and again, it goes towards a car that will last a long time. A lot of times, for example, the drive belt has the manufacturer's logo on it. Another place we can look is the oil filter. A lot of times it's visible, easily accessible. If it's, for example, like a Mobil 1 oil filter, that's a good sign. If it doesn't even have a brand name on it, that's a bad sign. The service records are another place we can look. So, I mean, they give a pretty telling history as well, like was the car serviced at the dealer or at Jiffy Lube? If the car doesn't even have any service records, that's not a comforting sign either. Although if it's a 300,000 mile Toyota Camry, I wouldn't expect that there are service records, but if the car doesn't have service records, sometimes the Carfax can be a godsend. Sometimes the Carfax will tell you more than just the smog check DMV stuff. Sometimes it tells you where the car was serviced. Sometimes it even tells you exactly what was serviced. But the Carfax also tells you things like the owners. If the car has had 8 owners in the past 5 years, that's a really bad sign. One, because it's human nature to not take as good care of something if you know you're not going to have it for a long time, but also because it could mean that the car has a lot of problems and these owners are just passing it off to the next unfortunate sap, which you don't want to be you. The service records can also warn you of the pristine low mileage example, where if you buy a 20-year-old car with really low miles that the only records in the service records are oil changes and air filter changes, and let's say it hasn't been driven in 10 years. I mean, if you intend to keep it as a museum showpiece or never drive it, that's fine. But if you do intend to actually put some miles on it, everything's gonna break when you do. All those rubber seals, relays, everything else has been sitting and rotting for those 20 years, and it's gonna be a lot of maintenance, so just be aware of that if you see a car like that. Last couple things on the TLC is if the car has aftermarket performance parts. Doesn't mean it wasn't loved, but probably means it was driven pretty hard, and again, that goes against the longevity side of things. Also, if those aftermarket performance parts were installed poorly, run, because I guarantee you there are some serious underlying problems in that car. Like I said, I know all these things are obvious, but it can be tempting to brush each one off individually and just focus on the amazing deal. You know, a lot of times it's really tempting to buy the clunker, save some money, you're handy with the wrench, but in the long run, not just the maintenance you'll have to put into it, but just in terms of the miles you can get out of the car, a lot of times the best deal is the nicest example you can find. The most dreaded one of all, the accident. I feel like this is what most people fear the most when they go to look at a car. And I'll say that not all accidents are bad. For example, if the car was in a minor fender bender, no structural damage, repaired really professionally, it's really hard to tell that it's been repainted. It's not on the Carfax because the owner didn't go through insurance and they wanted to pay for it out of pocket. Again, that goes back to the point of TLC. It shows that they really cared about the car and they wanted to keep it in great shape. So, you know, I wouldn't worry too much about something like that. I mean, unless of course it's a collector car and you know that anyone who comes to look at it is going to be super anal and go through it with a fine-tooth comb. But other than that, I wouldn't worry about something like that. Really, the main concern about accidents stems from frame damage. Because when a car is in a collision that's so bad that the frame of the car, the most core structural component, bends, that car is never going to be right. You know, it's not going to be as safe as it was. It's not going to handle quite right. The tires might wear unevenly. Other components that maybe weren't destroyed in the accidents but were damaged because of the impact could fail prematurely. I mean, like I said earlier, there's some people that go after salvage title cars that have been totaled, that have frame damage, etc. And if that's you, again, more power to you. But normal people, we don't really want to deal with all the headache and hassle that can bring. On top of that, a lot of insurance companies won't even insure salvage title cars, and then even if you find one that does and you get in an accident, they're not going to want to pay you out a lot because the car is not worth anything because it's salvage. So, frame damage, bad. But how do we tell if a car's been in an accident? There's actually a lot of signs. One, we can look at the paint. A lot of times just with our naked eye, we can spot a repaint. Although just because a car's been repainted doesn't necessarily mean it's been in an accident. For example, if the paint is peeling or what have you, maybe the owner just wanted to have it repainted, but know that in an accident, paint is something that does get redone. So paint can be one telltale sign of an accident. With your eyes, you can tell if the paint has a wavy texture, which is orange peel. No good job is going to have orange peel left over at the end. If it does, that means that the owner took it to a really cheap place. Not a good sign. If the base coat underneath the clear coat is kind of grainy, if the texture is different, again, not a sign of a quality job. It means that whoever was laying the base coat didn't have the finesse to do it smoothly. Also, if on adjacent panels the paint doesn't match exactly, the color's slightly off, again, sign of a bad repaint. And lastly, overspray. If they didn't mask off areas of the car correctly and there's paint spray that went onto rubber parts or any other parts that weren't supposed to be painted and you see little speckles all over, that's bad. That means the car has been repainted poorly. But a much more precise way to know if a car has been repainted, and also to help us tell if something's been in an accident, is this guy, a paint meter. What it does is it measures the distance from itself to the nearest point of metal, so when you touch it to the car's body, it essentially tells you how thick the paint is. When cars come from the factory, the paint is usually uniform around the car. The general thickness for factory car paint is from 4 to 7 mils, and if in one area of the car that thickness starts to get bigger, that indicates it's been repainted, because body shops don't take off the old paint when they repaint a car, they just paint over it. So added thickness, more paint. If the thickness spikes in a tiny area, that would indicate that there's some kind of dent underneath the paint that's been filled in with a body filler like Bondo and then painted over. The irony of this thing is that it only measures the paint thickness on metal. And when you think about the way that accidents happen, most accidents involve the bumpers. I mean, they're even called the bumpers because they are the first thing to bump into things, usually. And on modern cars, the bumpers are plastic, which renders this useless. Is there a workaround? Yes. Ultrasonic paint meters can measure the paint thickness on metal, plastic, fiberglass, carbon fiber. So if you're a used car dealer and you check for accident damage on a lot of cars, or if you have $2,000 to blow on an ultrasonic paint meter, then you could certainly get one. But that's how you would test for paint damage on a plastic bumper or on a fiberglass Corvette, for example. That's basically all we can do in terms of the paint. In terms of the body itself, look at the panel gaps. Does the space between panels match up on the left and right side of the car? If they don't, it's likely been in an accident. Are there inconsistencies? Do panels not line up? If you're still unsure, even after giving the car a good once over, you can also check, again, the Carfax. If the Carfax says the car has been in an accident, it's been in an accident. On the other hand, if it doesn't mention it, the car still could have been in an accident. Another avenue we can go down is simply Googling the VIN. I've walked away from a lot of cars because simply Googling the VIN has turned up results of former insurance auctions where the car was totaled, or sometimes you'll find a post on the forum where it was for sale from a previous owner and they give some information that maybe the person who's trying to sell it to you isn't being upfront about. All sorts of stuff. Googling the VIN, it doesn't cost anything, and it could potentially show you something that would make you not want to buy the car. Next mistake. This is one that doesn't get talked about a lot, and that would be mileage rollbacks. They are a thing. Out of the 40 million used cars that get sold every year in the US, there's about 500,000 that have had their odometers tampered with. And don't just think that that's limited to the old mechanical style odometers, because anyone can go on Amazon or eBay and buy these mileage corrector tools that plug right into your car's diagnostic port and type in a new mileage and hey presto, you've got a new number on the screen. Collector cars are even more susceptible to mileage rollbacks because if you think about a Ferrari, for example, the value of the car can increase dramatically with the difference of even a few thousand miles. Ferrari themselves were doing this. There was a lawsuit filed a few years back because Ferrari dealerships were actually rolling back the odometers on their own cars so they could sell them for more to their unsuspecting customers. We need to be concerned. In some cases we get lucky. Sometimes on newer cars the computer keeps track of the mileage separate from the actual odometer on the dash, and in that case the right OBD reader can tell you the mileage on the computer, and you know that if there's a discrepancy between what's shown on the dash, then the mileage has been tampered with. Also, on newer cars that are only a few years old, the tires are a telltale sign of a mileage rollback, because if you do the math, normal tires last usually at least 50,000 miles, and on average people drive 10,000 miles a year, so therefore if the car is less than 5 years old it should have the original tires. If the tires are new, could mean that there's more miles than you think. And really the last kind of easy place we're able to look is the Carfax. Again, well worth the $20 to avoid getting ripped off for thousands of dollars buying a car that you think is lower mileage than it really is. If the Carfax says that there's some kind of odometer inconsistency, chances are there is. There's a couple exceptions. For example, if the car has been imported from somewhere that uses kilometers and we're in miles, and maybe sometimes when the owner got a smog check, the person entering it in the computer converted it, sometimes they didn't, so it flip-flops back and forth. If you can check and do the conversion and verify that they all match up, then you're probably okay. But let's say that the owner is more clever. Let's say that they've just been driving for long periods of time with the speed sensor disconnected, just racking up free miles. Well, in that case, the only thing we have to go on is the fact that the rest of the car is still gonna show the mileage even though the odometer isn't. Look at all the places that get touched the most. The driver's door handle, the window switches, the gear lever, the steering wheel buttons, the pedals, the AC buttons, the radio buttons, and of course the driver's seat. If this stuff looks a lot more worn than some of the other cars, presumably in the same mileage range that you've been looking at, it could be because they've rolled back the mileage. So that's my advice on car buying, but I'll leave you with one last thought, which is if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. So with that being said, are there any any pitfalls I missed? Please share in the comments, because you're not only sharing with me, but anyone else who finds this video. Also, please consider liking this video if you've watched this far, because it doesn't cost you anything, it only takes a second, and it really helps the channel. Are there others?